My husband spent our money on his mistress during the divorce, then he realized his biggest mistake. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the air as they stepped into the newly built home they had waited years to afford. She walked barefoot across the hardwood floor, smiling as sunlight filtered through the large windows. He stood beside her with an arm around her shoulder, grinning for the photo they took at the threshold, two people appearing as a team. To anyone watching, they were the image of unity and happiness, a couple who had worked hard together to build something real. But even as she unpacked dishes and arranged books on the shelves, she noticed something she couldn't explain. He seemed distracted, more interested in checking his phone than sharing in the excitement. When she spoke about painting the nursery or picking out a new couch, his answers were clipped and vague. She chalked it up to stress from work. They had poured most of their savings into the house. Maybe he was just anxious about finances. Still, something about his silence began to settle uncomfortably in her stomach. It wasn't just the silence. Soon came the criticism. He started pointing out how she folded the laundry wrong or how she overcooked dinner. At first, it felt like harmless tension, two people adjusting to a new chapter. But the remarks became sharper, and the warmth between them began to cool. She tried to bring back their rhythm, planning cozy dinners, suggesting walks through the neighborhood. He always had an excuse: too tired, too busy, not in the mood. One evening, while she was tidying the living room, he sighed loudly and muttered that she should be more useful now that she wasn't working. She froze, remote control in hand, unsure if she heard correctly. "I didn't mean it like that," he said quickly, but the words lingered. She laughed it off at the time, brushing it away like dust, but deep inside, the first crack had formed. The man she had trusted with her future was slowly becoming someone she didn't recognize. It started with late-night calls that he claimed were about work. Then came the missed dinners, the rushed showers before heading out again, and the sudden need for separate finances to make things easier. She wanted to trust him, she had for years, but the signs were piling up. Receipts tucked into his jacket pocket showed dinners for two at expensive restaurants she'd never been to. When she asked, he waved it off. "Client meetings," he said. "You wouldn't understand how the business works." Her heart told her otherwise. He had grown distant, cold. She began keeping her own notes, screenshots of bank activity, photos of the receipts. Not because she was vindictive, but because she was scared. The house they lived in, the savings they built, it was all shared. Or so she thought. He wasn't just withdrawing from their marriage. He was slowly disappearing, piece by piece, without explanation or concern for the trail he was leaving behind. The truth came out in the most unexpected way. While she was out shopping for groceries, she ran into a mutual friend, someone they had both known for years. The friend smiled awkwardly, then leaned in. "I saw him the other night," she said hesitantly. "At that Italian place downtown. He wasn't alone." Her heart dropped. "It wasn't a client dinner," the friend added softly. "They were holding hands." She nodded, numb, and said thank you. Her body moved on autopilot as she finished shopping, but her mind spiraled. Back home, she waited for him to return. He came in late, humming a song she didn't recognize. She didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she asked how work had been. He lied. Right to her face. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grocery bags she had never finished unpacking. Something inside her shifted. This wasn't uncertainty anymore. It was betrayal, and now it had a face and a place. the quiet ache turned into a silent storm. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. When she finally brought it up, her voice was calm. "I know about her." He didn't deny it. He didn't even look surprised. "Maybe this marriage has run its course," he said, leaning against the kitchen counter like it was a business deal, not a life they built together. She stared at him, searching his face for regret, for hesitation. There was none. Only indifference, almost relief. As if he had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her to say something so he wouldn't have to. That night, she packed a single bag and left for her sister's house. Not because she was giving up, but because she needed space to think. The home they had bought together no longer felt safe. She didn't cry. Not then. There was too much to process. Her mind was already sorting through what came next: divorce, finances, the life she'd have to rebuild. She looked back only once as she pulled out of the driveway. The lights in the house were off, but the betrayal still glowed like a beacon in her chest. A week later, she returned to the house to collect a few important documents and clothes. He was sitting on the couch, casually sipping coffee as if nothing had changed. "We should just get this over with," he said, not looking up. "Let's file. I'll be generous. You can keep the car." She blinked, processing his words. The car had been a wedding anniversary gift, chosen by both of them, but now it was being offered like a parting token. "Generous," he repeated, as though her life could be summarized by his approval. She wanted to scream, but instead she stayed quiet, calmly replying, "We'll handle this legally." His smirk faded slightly at her composed tone. He had expected tears, panic, maybe even begging. But she gave him none of it. He didn't know that every moment of silence from her now was calculated. He had started a war disguised as a divorce, and he didn't even realize he'd underestimated the woman he thought he could walk over. The lawyer she hired sat across the desk, reading through the financial summaries. Her brows furrowed. "These withdrawals weren't in your initial records." Together, they went through the online statements. Thousands had been moved from their joint savings over the last 3 months. "These are personal accounts," the lawyer said. "Opened under his name, but clearly using joint funds." She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from confusion, but fury. That money was meant for their home, their future. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. He hadn't simply checked out of their marriage, he had siphoned off pieces of their stability without warning. She remembered the day they'd sat in the bank office setting up the account, both signing the forms with matching pens. Now he had turned that account into a weapon. But instead of breaking down, she wrote it all down: dates, amounts, descriptions. She was beginning to understand the game he was playing. And now, she was playing, too. The box arrived while she was still staying with her sister. It had been rerouted from their shared address. When she saw the label from an upscale boutique, her heart sank. She hadn't ordered anything. Inside was a designer purse, thousands of dollars worth, charged to the joint account. The receipt inside had a note, "Gift for C." Her hands trembled as she held the tag, the ink still crisp, like a fresh insult. He hadn't just moved on. He was flaunting it, with her money. That night, she sat in silence, the purse laid across the table like evidence in a courtroom. Her sister offered to return it or burn it. She did neither. She took photos, logged it in the folder she'd started for her lawyer. Every detail counted now. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. If he thought she would walk away quietly, he clearly had no idea who he had married. That purse, more than anything else, made her resolve unshakable. At the grocery store, her card declined. The cashier smiled politely, but her face flushed with heat. "Could you try it again?" she asked, but the answer was the same. She pulled out her backup card, thankfully her personal one, and completed the purchase, but the embarrassment clung to her like a shadow. In the parking lot, she called the bank. The joint card had been frozen by him. No notice. No warning. Just gone. He had cut her off entirely. She sat in her car gripping the steering wheel, the groceries in the passenger seat, and stared ahead. This was his message: you don't matter anymore. But what he didn't know was that every moment like this, every financial slap in the face, only sharpened her focus. She wasn't going to rely on anything connected to his name again. Her lawyer would handle it, but she would be ready. Her independence wouldn't be taken from her, it would be rebuilt on her terms. Sitting in her lawyer's office the next morning, she laid out everything: the bank transfers, the purse, the frozen card. Her lawyer listened carefully, then folded her hands and leaned forward. "He's trying to strip you of power," she said. "This isn't just about money. It's control. But we're going to stop him." Hearing those words, something stirred inside her. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone in the storm. They discussed strategy, asset tracing, injunctions, emergency motions. Her lawyer explained how they'd request account records, flag unauthorized spending, and ensure he couldn't keep draining resources. As she signed the papers, her signature was strong, steady. The woman who had once shared dreams with him was gone. In her place stood someone who had been betrayed, humiliated, and now ready. She wasn't just going to survive the divorce. She was going to expose it. At a dinner with mutual friends, he arrived without warning. She had been invited by the host, an old friend who still believed both sides deserved space. But when he entered the room, confidently dressed and full of charm, she knew he came with a performance planned. As the conversation turned toward their separation, he smiled and said, "I'm letting her keep the car and a few things. I'm not unreasonable." A few guests nodded awkwardly, unsure of the full story. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Let him brag. Let him paint himself as the generous one. Inside, she burned. Not from embarrassment, but from the realization that he genuinely believed he was the victim. His calm, casual tone made it sound like he was doing her a favor by discarding her with leftovers. But each false statement he delivered in public was more rope. And soon, he'd hang himself with it. The following weekend, she agreed to meet another friend for brunch, someone who had known them both but remained neutral. When she arrived, she found her friend already seated. But across the room, a familiar voice echoed. He was there too, at another table. With him sat the woman from the boutique receipt, draped in designer clothes, smiling widely. He caught her eye and raised a glass, lips curling into a smirk. "To new beginnings," he said loud enough for her to hear. Her stomach twisted, not from jealousy, but from the sheer audacity. The other diners looked over. Whispers followed. She held her posture, sipping her coffee with steady hands. Her friend whispered, "He's doing this on purpose." She nodded. Of course he was. But what he didn't realize was that this wasn't hurting her. It was confirming everything. His cruelty was no longer private. It was becoming a public spectacle, and she was documenting all of it. At a neighborhood gathering, hosted by acquaintances they had both known for years, he took the opportunity to rewrite history. Surrounded by laughter and small talk, he turned the conversation toward finances. "She was always irresponsible," he said. "Never understood how to budget. I had to step in before everything fell apart." People chuckled uncomfortably. A few glanced at her, unsure whether to believe him. She stood just a few feet away, her plate untouched. She could have said something. Could have defended herself. But instead, she simply smiled and walked away, leaving him in mid-sentence. Later that evening, two of the guests approached her privately. "We're sorry," one said. "We had no idea he was like that." The truth had started to leak through the cracks in his performance. The more he tried to embarrass her, the more people began to see his desperation. Humiliation works both ways, and he didn't even see it coming. Back at her sister's house, she compiled everything: screenshots of bank records, audio from conversations, witness messages, emails with passive-aggressive threats. The folder grew daily. She wasn't obsessed with revenge, she was preparing for justice. Her lawyer had told her, "The court doesn't always care how you feel. It cares what you can prove." So she documented everything. Time-stamped and filed. Each insult. Each unauthorized charge. Each public dig. The emotional weight was heavy, but she knew what she was doing. She wasn't just collecting evidence, she was reclaiming her voice. For every time he said she was forgettable, or wasteful, or weak, she now had proof of who he really was. The man who stood in front of friends as a victim was about to meet the version of her he never thought would rise. She wasn't a woman being discarded. She was a witness building a case. On a chilly Monday morning, her lawyer made a suggestion she hadn't expected: "We should bring in someone to follow the money, and maybe more." Within days, a private investigator was on the case. Quiet, discreet, and meticulous. Within 2 weeks, he delivered the first report: an apartment rented in cash under a false name, located just 20 minutes from their home. The mistress had been living there for months, on money pulled from joint accounts. There were photos, receipts, even surveillance footage of him entering the apartment multiple times a week, sometimes carrying shopping bags. Her heart ached, but not from betrayal anymore. It ached because this is what he thought he could get away with. She studied every image, not with sadness, but with certainty. This wasn't hearsay. This was fact. And facts don't lie in court. His house of lies was starting to tilt. And she was the one pushing. She stood in silence as the investigator laid out the photos, her husband unlocking the door to a fully furnished apartment, the same woman from brunch kissing him in the hallway, receipts for high-end furniture dated weeks before the divorce was filed. All of it, purchased through hidden transfers. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, it was the confidence. He hadn't even tried to cover it up. He had assumed she'd be too emotional, too fragile, too slow to act. But she wasn't. She carefully labeled every photo, attached them to financial records, and handed them over to her attorney. "This is not just misconduct," the lawyer said, eyes scanning the documents. "This is marital fraud." That night, the woman sat alone at her sister's kitchen table, sipping tea as her phone buzzed with messages she ignored. She had once shared a bed with a man who now stole from her to fund a lie. But he was about to learn that lies come with receipts and consequences. Court day arrived with the crisp weight of expectation. Her lawyer entered with a stack of documents, calm and ready. When the judge reviewed the evidence, unauthorized spending, the rented apartment, the private surveillance, the room fell into a dense silence. The judge looked over her glasses and asked him directly, "Is there a reason this wasn't disclosed in your financial declaration?" He stumbled, muttered something about temporary arrangements, but it was too late. The judge ordered immediate discovery of all personal accounts and placed a freeze on the remaining joint funds. "This court will not tolerate deceptive behavior during legal proceedings," she said sternly. For the first time, he looked rattled. His smirk was gone, his eyes shifting to the side. The courtroom felt colder. The power he had once wielded so easily was slipping, replaced by doubt not just in the court, but in those around him who were beginning to question the story he had sold them. 2 days later, more evidence surfaced. Her lawyer obtained footage from several luxury boutiques, showing the mistress shopping freely, purses, jewelry, shoes, all charged to an account connected to the woman's name. The store clerks had even greeted her by the same last name as the wife. "She signed as if she was you," the attorney said. "That's identity misuse." Another layer for the court to see. The betrayal was now legal, not just emotional. And the narrative was shifting entirely. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply continued adding to her files, placing copies in the master folder with neat tabs. Everything had a label now. Betrayal. Fraud. Identity misuse. Financial misconduct. The woman who once couldn't sleep now worked late into the night, eyes sharp, emotions contained. Her strength was no longer silent, it was structured. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing for resolution. At the next hearing, he took the stand with the same polished expression he always wore. Under oath, he claimed there was no active romantic relationship outside the marriage and that all financial activity was necessary and fair. Her lawyer remained calm, but within seconds pulled out the documents. Receipts with the mistress's signature. Video of them entering the hidden apartment. Credit card bills tied to boutique purchases. It wasn't a cross-examination. It was an unraveling. The judge leaned forward and asked again, "Are you certain about your testimony?" The silence that followed was deafening. His lawyer whispered frantically, but he stayed quiet. The damage was done. Perjury was now on the table. She watched from her seat, hands clasped calmly. It was no longer about what she felt, it was about what could be proven. And she had more than enough. What he built on arrogance was falling apart under the weight of truth. After court, she returned to her car and sat still for a long time. The courthouse loomed behind her, but she didn't look back. For the first time in months, the exhaustion hit her. Not from weakness, but from the constant pressure of fighting while pretending she was fine. Her chest tightened, her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She exhaled deeply, holding the steering wheel with both hands as if steadying more than just the car, steadying herself. Later that evening, her sister found her on the couch, surrounded by open files and legal pads. "You can breathe now," she said gently. The woman nodded, but didn't move. She had survived the lies, the public humiliation, and the financial manipulation. She had reached the point of emotional collapse, and hadn't collapsed. Instead, she had become sharper, more focused. The breaking point didn't break her. It clarified everything. The worst had already happened, and she was still standing. One evening, as she reviewed documents in her email, a message popped up from an unfamiliar name. The subject line read, "You're not alone." Curious, she opened it. The woman who wrote had once been involved with her ex years ago, another discarded chapter in his long history of deception. Her words were calm but clear. "He did the same to me," she wrote. "Manipulated, used, and erased. I saw your name in an article and wanted you to have this." Attached were old messages, screenshots, and statements. The woman hadn't come looking for revenge, only to help. "I couldn't speak up back then," she explained, "but maybe this helps you now." And it did. It confirmed a pattern. It solidified his intentions. This wasn't just about one bad relationship, it was about a man who believed he could walk over women without consequence. She added the messages to her file. She wasn't just building a case for divorce anymore. She was building a case for accountability. Her attorney filed a motion for full asset discovery and financial reassessment. With the weight of new evidence, the court moved fast. Every hidden transfer, every unauthorized charge, every undeclared account was now part of the official record. He was losing control of the narrative. The judge issued a formal order for transparency. His lawyer objected, weakly. The courtroom atmosphere had changed. What once felt like a battleground now felt like justice realigning itself. At home, she felt lighter. The energy that had once gone into surviving now shifted toward building. She began reorganizing her days, returning to freelance work, walking in the mornings, rebuilding structure around herself. Her sister noticed it first. "You're not just fighting anymore," she said. "You're moving forward." She smiled, gently touching the file folder she once clung to. "I'm not just surviving him," she whispered. "I'm becoming someone he never expected." The next court hearing brought a new surprise. The judge, reviewing the full extent of financial misconduct, approved an emergency motion to freeze all his personal accounts until the final settlement. Panic showed on his face for the first time. He leaned into his lawyer, whispering urgently, but it was too late. The freeze meant no access to the money he had hidden, and no way to fund the lifestyle he had built with someone else's trust. Word spread quickly. The mistress, unaware of the freeze, attempted to use one of the cards the next day, declined. That evening, she was seen leaving the hidden apartment with 2 suitcases. No messages. No goodbyes. Just silence. He had lost the woman he betrayed for, the money he tried to steal, and the mask he wore for so long. The walls he once leaned on were now closing in. And for the first time, he had no idea what to do next. She heard about the mistress leaving from the investigator. She packed up and left quickly. "No contact since," he said. The woman didn't smile, but the weight in her chest eased. It wasn't about gloating, it was about seeing truth catch up to arrogance. The mistress, once flaunted so publicly, had vanished when the money ran dry. He had traded stability for vanity and ended up with neither. It was poetic, almost pitiful. He tried calling her after that. Once. Just once. A brief, shallow message, "We need to talk." She didn't reply. What was there left to say? He wasn't reaching out for closure, only for comfort in the fallout of his own decisions. She deleted the message without hesitation. The man who once believed he held all the power was now grasping in the dark. And she had no intention of lighting the way. Weeks later, as the final court date approached, he made a formal request to meet privately before the next hearing. Against her lawyer's advice, she agreed, only to hear what he had to say. They met in a neutral office, no warmth between them. He looked tired, aged by stress. "I messed up," he said simply. I didn't see what I had. I was angry, and I blamed you for things that weren't your fault. She listened, unmoved. His words carried weight, but not the kind that changes hearts. They were confessions made out of regret, not repentance. If there's any chance, he began, but she raised a hand gently. This isn't about us anymore, she replied. It's about what's right. And this is already behind me. For the first time, he truly looked small. Not because she hated him, but because she had finally outgrown him. The courtroom felt different that morning, calmer. She walked in with quiet confidence, papers neatly filed, expression composed. Her ex sat across the room, slouched, eyes dim. No more smug smiles. The judge entered and went directly to the ruling. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, she began, this court grants the petitioner sole ownership of the marital home, primary rights to remaining assets, and denies all claims of financial compensation to the respondent. There was no gasp, no outburst, just a long silence. He looked down, the weight of the ruling settling like concrete. She remained still, a subtle nod confirming what she had known for weeks. The outcome was never about revenge, it was about restoration. He had tried to strip her of everything, and in the end, it was himself he left empty. The courtroom adjourned, but her life was just beginning again, on her terms. In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. Friends who had once sided with him, believing his stories, doubting her silence, began reaching out. Messages arrived with awkward apologies. I'm sorry I didn't ask your side. I see it all so clearly now. She didn't respond with bitterness. She simply said, thank you, and moved forward. Vindication didn't need to be loud. It could be quiet and whole. At a neighborhood event, an older woman pulled her aside. I judged you, she said softly. And I was wrong. She smiled, not out of pride, but peace. She had been shamed, doubted, and publicly humiliated. But now the same voices that once whispered behind her back were the ones offering her respect. She had earned her dignity back, not by fighting louder, but by standing taller. An organization that supported women in legal transition contacted her after hearing her story. We'd like you to lead a project helping women navigate financial recovery after divorce, the email read. She stared at it for several minutes. For months, her life had been filled with files, hearings, receipts, and silence. And now, that very storm had become her foundation. She accepted the offer with a calm resolve. Her first day at the new role, she stood before a small group of women, each carrying their own version of her story. She didn't speak like a victim. She spoke like a guide. You're not broken, she told them. You're just in the middle of a very strong comeback. Heads nodded, eyes filled with quiet fire. The pain she once thought would break her had become the light others could follow. One evening, back in the house she once feared losing, she lit candles and made a simple dinner. The space felt warm again, reborn. She sat at the table, no longer waiting for someone to fill the chair across from her. Peace didn't come in grand gestures. It came in stillness, in clean air, in a quiet that didn't ache. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. The world could wait. Tonight, she had earned silence. She looked around at the walls they once painted together. Now, every color, every frame, every chair was hers. Reclaimed. Respected. She raised a glass, not in celebration of the end, but in gratitude for the beginning. Sometimes, survival wasn't loud or victorious. Sometimes it was soft, still, and full of grace. And sometimes that's exactly what power looked like. 1 year later, she stood at a podium, speaking at a conference on financial justice for women. Her name, once buried under rumors and accusations, now appeared in bold on the banner behind her. As she spoke, she glanced at the back of the room where a familiar figure stood, her ex, alone, unnoticed. He lingered for a moment, then slipped out before she finished. She never broke stride. After the event, she walked to her car, the wind brushing her hair gently. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had rebuilt her world piece by piece. No bitterness. No need for revenge. Just strength anchored in quiet resilience. She drove home to the life she had carved out of broken pieces and realized it was more beautiful than anything they had built together. Not because of what she lost, but because of what she chose to become.